Hello, everyone. Welcome to City Parks Alliance's Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership, or ORLP, Technical Assistance Webinar. I'm Julie Waterman, and I'm the Advocacy Director at City Parks Alliance. I know that everyone attending this webinar is interested in learning how to access federal dollars for their own local park project, and it is our goal to help guide you through that process. City Parks Alliance and our partners, the National Park Service and the National Recreation and Park Association, are excited to host this ORLP webinar. If you're interested in continuing education credits for AICP or LACES or City Parks Alliance's general CEU offering, look for the follow-up email with instructions on how to claim your credits. For those of you who are new to City Parks Alliance, we are the only independent nationwide membership organization solely dedicated to urban parks. Our vision is that everyone in urban America will have access to the benefits of parks, recreational opportunities, and green spaces, and we work closely with the National Park Service to help make that happen. You can visit our website at cityparksalliance.org to learn more about the Alliance and how membership can benefit your organization. You may also look for additional federal funding sources in our Equitable Park Funding Hub on our website under the Resources tab. The ORLP is a nationally competitive grant program funded through the Land and Water Conservation Fund that focuses on providing outdoor recreation in disadvantaged communities within urban areas. The National Park Service has funds available for land acquisition, new park development, or the renovation of existing parks, all with the goal to connect or reconnect people with the outdoors. For this application round, the National Park Service has made the process much easier and has more resources than ever to review the applications and administer the grants. So we are thrilled to see these new developments. Thus far, the National Park Service has awarded more than 130 grants for park projects in underserved communities. You can find all 7 rounds of awards on our website under the Funding tab. Through City Parks Alliance's educational and promotional efforts, it is our hope that the National Park Service continues to receive strong ORLP applications in this next round. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce and share our gratitude to our guest presenters from the National Park Service, David Goldstein, Program Lead of Competitive Programs, and Missy Morrison, Manager, Planning and Policy Compliance Officer, who will give the main presentation. We are also excited to have Heather Ramsey-Anden, Program Manager, King County Land Conservation Initiative, join us. King County has received numerous ORLP grants, and Heather has some great tips and best practices that she will share to help make your park project a success. During this hour-and-a-half technical assistance webinar, Missy, David, and Heather will provide detailed information on the ORLP grant program, as well as some information on the LWCF state formula grant program, as this program may be an alternative funding option for your project. They'll review applicant and project eligibility requirements for this next competitive round, explain the application and selection process, give tips on writing a strong ORLP application, and then answer your questions. As I mentioned, there'll be a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. If you have a general question, you may submit them in the Zoom Q&A box. But if you have a specific question about your project, then you should reach out to your state's office responsible for administering the ORLP grants, and we will provide you with a contact list and a follow-up email. We anticipate the National Park Service will open the application process soon, and when that occurs, City Parks Alliance will send registrants the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, and additional application materials. We have a great turnout today, and to ensure we can respond to everyone as questions or technical difficulties arise, here are some tips. To ask a question, click the questions icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Type the question in the box and click send. You'll be able to send questions throughout the presentation, but you may want to make a note of your question and see if it's answered later in the presentation before submitting it. If you experience a technical problem during the presentation, please type it in the question box and send it to us. And if you miss something, don't worry. Links to today's recording, the presentation, and related resources will be emailed to all registrants. Okay, let's get started. Missy and David, take it away.
Thank you so much, Julie. I am so happy to be here. As our host has said, my name is Missy Morrison. I work for the National Park Service Land and Water Conservation Fund program, and I'm based out of our Washington, D.C. office. I've had the great pleasure of being able to work with this program since 2020, although I've been with the Park Service since 2011 and working in various capacities as primarily a community planner, environmental compliance specialist, and project management. And now I'm the manager of our policy and planning shop in LWCF. And I'm here today alongside our ORLP program manager, David Goldstein, to talk a little bit about one of our other grant programs apart from ORLP, which is the basic LWCF state formula grant. So you can advance the slide now, David. Thanks. So today, as I noted, I'm going to generally touch on the LWCF state formula grant and make a comparison with what David will spend a lot more time discussing in his presentation, the ORLP grant requirements. We want to stress in this general introduction about the state formula grant that this is a grant available to you also, that if you have other projects or if you find your ORLP project you're working on maybe doesn't fit the ORLP program precisely and the criteria, you should look to the state formula grant program and apply for this type of grant. So you have other options. We just want you to know that. So next slide, go ahead, David. The Land and Water Conservation Fund Act, or LWCF, was enacted in 1965 with the purpose of preserving, developing, and ensuring public accessibility to our outdoor recreation resources. Both the LWCF State Formula Grant and the ORLP competitive grants are authorized under this act and follow the basic requirements of the act. And this slide highlights the very basic requirements that all grants must meet. For example, all projects funded with LWCF funds must align with the priorities of the state's currently approved Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, or SCORP. Each state and territory must have an approved SCORP, and the SCORPs need to be developed with a significant amount of public outreach in order to be able to determine outdoor recreation priorities in their states. Additionally, any park or other recreation area that receives assistance from an LWCF grant program must be maintained for outdoor recreation use in perpetuity. The Act provides only one method to lift this restriction, which is by replacing the area no longer being used for recreation with new property of at least equal fair market value and reasonably equivalent recreation utility and location. And our state partners are primarily responsible for ensuring that the requirements of the LWCF Act and regulations are met for the LWCF sites within their states. Next slide, please. Generally, the LWCF Act provides that LWCF grants may be used for acquisition of land for and development of basic outdoor recreation facilities. And we partner with each state's state liaison officer and their staff to administer and implement the requirements of these grant programs. For state formula grants, it is the state program that must solicit and select projects from across their state and submit applications to the National Park Service for funding. States then pass through the grant funds to their applicants, and they are called subgrantees or project sponsors. Per the LWCF Act, all grants must be matched dollar for dollar with non-federal resources, which can be in the form of cash or in-kind contributions of services, supplies, equipment, or land. Next slide, please. Briefly, a little bit about the ORLP program for the sake of comparison. The ORLP was authorized by Congress in 2014 and is administered, as I noted, under the authority of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act. Basically, ORLP originated through two sentences in 2014 congressional funding advice. The NPS then, in coordination with Congress, state partners, and other interested parties, developed the goals of the ORLP program. While these are both LWCF programs, the major difference for this grant is that projects are selected through a national competition, whereas the state formula grants are selected through a process at the state level and submitted to NPS by our state agencies. Again, it's a requirement of the LWCF Act that all projects funded through LWCF funds must provide dollar-for-dollar matching funds, and that's a requirement of this grant as well. Next slide, please. And this slide can be used to help you better see the differences between the state formula grant program and the ORLP grant program. And again, I'll just note that if you discover your project isn't eligible for ORLP, it may still be eligible for funding through the formula state program, grant program, which, as you can see, doesn't have the community characteristics of some of the other criteria of the ORLP grant, which David will describe in detail in a minute. For the state formula grant, our state partners solicit and select grants, then submit grants that are ready to be funded to the National Park Service. For ORLP, states solicit grant applications, but projects are selected and funded through a national competition, which involves a merit review panel selection at the federal and national level. And all this is managed by our ORLP program staff. State formula grant NACS funding for projects is determined by the state's apportionment, but the National Park Service, in its notice of funding opportunity, determines the minimum and maximum grant award amounts for the ORLP grants. The state formula grant does not have the community served and population requirements that the ORLP program requires. For both grants, your projects need matching dollars, and your project should align with the existing statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan or SCORE. So for both these programs, our state partners are really playing the very first primary role in accepting applications and submission to the National Park Service. Projects must always be submitted first to your states, and our state partners provide much of the initial guidance and have specific timing requirements for accepting applications. So our state partners play a substantial role in the application process, so it's important very early on to reach out to your state LWCF program. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in either of these programs, generally the state LWCF office is your first stop for information. Reach out to your state LWCF administrators, familiarize yourself with your state's application process and timing for both formula and ORLP, so you know your project will be eligible and so you know when to expect announcements. And review your state's SCORE so you understand the basic priorities of your state's plan. So that is it for my slides, and thank you so much again for your time today. I'll stick around for any questions at the end, and would like to turn it over at this time to David Goldstein, our Competitive Grants Program Manager. Thank you.
Thanks, Missy. Thanks, Julie. Heather, I'm glad you're here. And thanks, City Parks Alliance. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time today to listen. I know a lot of people are very interested in this program. And the last year, we've actually seen the most interest in this program that we've seen in the last 10 years, with last year receiving nearly 80 applications. So it's an exciting time for the program, and ORLP, we are just about to release the next notice of funding opportunity. We believe it will be out shortly in a couple of weeks. And as Julie said, CPA will announce, and they'll support an announcement to the people who are attending today, so that you all know when we're beginning to receive applications digitally through the grants.gov portal. So hold on, and we will now talk about ORLP a little bit. ORLP is really a four-step process, and I'll show you this graphic. This graphic will also be in the NOFO to sort of explain where we're headed. You're going to make an application. We'll talk a little bit about that here today. And then our team will merit review that application based on the substance of the questions that are asked and your answers to those questions that will be available in the notice. And we'll talk about what those questions are today. And then we'll make an award announcement. I think some people have seen that we just recently made one in September. We also made one in May of last year, or of this year. And you know, we've over the course of the last 10 years, we've announced nearly 200 projects, and you know, we expect to probably announce another 30 to 60 a year, and we will make an award announcement after we've done the merit review. And then once we've made the award announcement, we will work with the state to make sure that the project has all of the appropriate documentation in it, and that the budgets are in line, and also that any federal compliance is taken care of before we make the actual award to the state, who will then pass the money to the subrecipient. Okay. So it's sort of, it's a four-step process. And in some cases, I guess some people would refer to this as a dual application process. You're applying for the merit review, and if we then make the commitment to that proposal, we'll then work with you to move to an award, which would be the actual sort of second piece of the application. ORLP is based on one objective and 4 goals. The objective, I think, as Missy stated, stemming from what was developed through Congress and constituent parties, the states generally, is to improve parks, recreation opportunities, and conservation areas in urban and underserved communities with the purposes and requirements of the LWCF Act, which is to increase access to outdoor recreation and conservation opportunities for all Americans. ORLP, in specific, meets that objective with 2 eligibility criteria that are very critical. And one is that the project being proposed must be in a census tract municipality or city with 25,000 or more people based on the 2020 census. And also, you need to demonstrate the need for having that park in the community as an underserved community. Talk about that in a second in terms of how we get that eligibility met for that objective. The required population is demonstrated, it can be demonstrated by using United States Census tracts, or you can use the aggregated urban census areas to show us that the people impacted by the project is in a population of 25,000 or greater. Federally recognized tribes, Alaska Native communities, and Native Hawaiian organizations are eligible to apply for projects regardless of their census numbers. There are other eligibility requirements that we'll talk about in terms of like land and tenure and working with the state. Those things are in there too, but we are open for business with those communities directly outside of census, because many of these communities, it's difficult for them to make those census tract needs. At least one of the following information sets can be used to propose a community's underserved status. So you can use what is now available widely across the government from the Center for Environmental Quality, their climate and environmental justice screening tool. You can use that to demonstrate that there is need in an area, and you can actually use that tool to use multiple descriptors: climate vulnerability, unemployment, lack of education, number of English speakers, age grade of a community. You could make many different descriptors show in the CGES tool to allow us to see and understand underserved. Another one would be to use the EJ screen tool from the Environmental Protection Agency, which would demonstrate a community's proximity to an environmentally challenged area or community that has been impacted inadvertently or through longstanding environmental quality problems. The last one would be that we would just accept a statement of need. If the community that is asking for the project meets the 25,000 or more population standard, that you could write up why it is that this particular community is demonstrated as underserved for a park and having opportunities that are prescribed under the LWCF Act, and we will read them and we will accept them. We have done this for the entire existence of this program to accommodate the territories, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, and also federally recognized tribes and Alaska Native communities that have had questions come up about eligibility. There's some considerations about evaluating those eligibility requirements and the other considerations for the program. States have to apply to ORLP through grants.gov. Individual communities cannot submit their applications to grants.gov. They have to go through the states to do that. The states do offer a process for accepting ORLP applications, and you really should ensure that you consult with your state liaison officer or the state liaison's office so that you make sure that you're meeting their eligibility requirements and that they can back your project being submitted to us. Another consideration is, so we just talked about census tracts and maps. Any map that you use will accept a half-mile buffer to discuss the eligibility to ensure that if there's a community that is somehow just on the edge of where the park project is going to be placed, and they're not exactly in some square on a map somewhere, we'll accept a half-mile buffer. That sort of conforms to GIS, geographical standards, for how we read maps actually around data, and we usually admit a half-mile buffer. And it also fits with some of our partners who talk about 10-minute walk and other access points to understand that where a park is situated and their user community may be at some small distance between the two. And so we accept and understand that. Matching commitments in the past for this program have been required upfront, documented, and held. However, we found that over time, it's taken a little while sometimes for projects to get from acceptance and approval of a commitment from the government to actually finally having a funded agreement. And that sometimes is a bit of a strain for the people to make commitments for the match, and sometimes a strain on governments to make those matches. So we would like to know about the commitment, and we do ask you for it in the application, but it is not a requirement up front. And then lastly, in the past, we've said that ORLP grants can't be applied to other LWCF sites or sites that have received ORLP funding in the past. And that no longer is a requirement here. We will consider them. Again, in the application criteria, as we'll talk about here in a second, we will actually ask you if you've received previous funding, and we will take that into consideration, not necessarily negatively or positively, but we want to know that what we're funding is part of a long-term plan. So you can have phased projects, and we certainly want to support them when we can, as we can. So let's talk a little bit more about evaluation criteria and how the projects will actually be graded and scored. We've talked about criteria 1, which meets the ORLP objective. So we will ask you questions about how the project meets the needs of 25,000 people and what is the underserved nature of the community. And we've given an outline, I just outlined how we would look at that criteria, either using some of the tools I mentioned, or also looking at having a description of the community that you're trying to serve with the application of building this particular park or securing this parcel. Criterion tool 2 meets one of the goals, and that is that all of the goals, all of the projects that ORLP supports should result from collaborations with the communities that they serve. Collaboration ensures that planning and land development decisions are being made by the communities, and we want to make sure that when the state is supporting those projects that are community-based. So what are some of the things we might evaluate you on? Well, we would like to know who is being engaged, who showed up to meetings, how many meetings did you have? Did you collect information using digital or social media? Did you have surveys? Has an NGO or a community group been working in collaboration with the state to ensure that there have been planning meetings? Is the work that you're doing already part of a community master plan? All of those kinds of questions or all of those kinds of answers we would like to see included in the application, and that will bolster and help us answer whether or not the project meets criterion 2 in this particular goal. Criterion 3 is the goal that highlights this public-private partnerships and whether or not the non-federal match share is being considered, and ensure that the community is aware that they need to have that non-federal match share available, and also make the state aware that the non-federal share or what we call the match is available. Also, we would like to know the nature of some of the community interactions that you're having through those public-private partnerships. Is there a partnership with perhaps another national NGO or a local community garden group? Who's going to support the park over time? Is there programming that's anticipated that a third party other than the community or the state would be providing? Is the municipality involved? We want to understand that we want to understand and see all of the different ways that the investment in this park are going to be made sustainable through use and the commitments of the community around it. And then lastly, we would like to know, this is where we would like to know a little bit about, have you received, what other sort of planning support or what other park support has been provided this particular parcel or park in the past? Is this a rehabilitation project? Is this a neglected park that now has a new constituency supporting it? So all of those things at this point under criterion 3, we would ask you questions and like to have some answers to. Criterion 4, we want to make sure that these projects are actually supporting green space and the development of healthier communities, and not just for the people using the park, but also perhaps ensuring increase of conservation space, and also investments in things that might make things like stormwater infrastructure or other types of climate resiliency for the community better, and that the park's infrastructure should actually be supporting improvements that may demonstrate nature-based solutions, removing asphalt, adding grass and trees to improve water circulation. There's a lot built into the LWCF that recommends support of wetlands and support of securing waters for habitat. And where possible in some of these projects, we would like to sort of know and note if those things are actually being measured or required here. We are interested in knowing if you're going to build a community garden in this space, and what are the requirements for that, and then also the sorts of ideas around adding or changing vegetation to make sure it's sustainable. Is it native? Is it local? And then also asking some questions about who might be maintaining that vegetation cover. Also, at this point, we will also be talking about who's serving, who's actually working and staying in this park, and are these people that are commuting into the park using bicycles or walking paths? Are there circulation patterns that allow people to access this park? And improve it? How does the park improve the overall sort of environmental health of the community that's using it? Criterion 5, we want to know how this park project will improve the overall character of the community, or preserve it, or encode it. In the last several years, we've seen a lot of projects that have asked for interpretive signage to talk about things that may have happened in a park. We recognize that parks are cultural places. They're not just places where people gather, but they're places where things have happened. There have been asks to build murals. There have been asks to have community agriculture processing centers. These things are all important because they create centers of activity for community, and they sort of heighten the role of the park in solidifying the character of the community. And so we're interested in those kinds of improvements if they're being asked for in the development of this project, how those things are being met. We also know that in some cases there are rehabilitation projects where we're looking at old parks that are disused or have fallen into disuse, and we want to see them improve to meet the needs of a new community. And this is a great way to foster hope and inspire change in a community that's trying to make some efforts to support change. And that's very much what ORLP sort of inspired by, and that's the sort of work we'd like to support. And so we want you to tell us about it. So those are the main criteria that we'll be looking at when we do the merit evaluation of your project. And those are the things that we see as critical points of engagement with your program, with your project proposal when we receive it, and how we review it. So let's talk about how we review things. So our teams will review to make sure that all the eligibility documents are in the program, are in the proposal that we've received, and that those proposals are complete, so we can move them on to the merit review. We also will, if we are missing information, as we are allowed to under federal regulations for financial assistance and procurement, we will reach out to the state if we are missing documentation. And it is important that you work with the state and we work with the state to ensure that we have all the documentation. Sometimes things get submitted and they're missing. And we are aware of that, and we will do what we can to make sure that the applications are complete before we pass them on to merit review. We will use external outdoor recreation industry and partner experts to perform our merit review. We will work with them to make sure that they have non-disclosure forms. We will make sure that they are outside of that they adhere to conflict of interest rules for the Department of the Interior. And those are external reviewers from landscape architecture, from parks and recreation planning, from service and maintenance industries who support parks and recreation programs, city planners. Those people will be a national review panel, and they will review the merits of those 5 criteria that I just described. Once we'll make sure that there are 2 external reviewers looking at each project, and we'll make sure that they're not working obviously in a region or in a place where their community or their community practice or their employer is working. And then lastly, I just want to stress that even though the program and compliance staff will support the initial review for the completeness of applications, the merit review process is overseen by a completely independent piece of the agency that is now in this competitive programs office that I oversee. There are 4 people that are just simply focused on merit review, and they're responsible for the training, the registry, and the completeness of that merit review process, which they then pass on to our leadership, the projects that we think we can make the commitments to, that we will be able to make the commitments to, and they will make those recommendations to the director of the National Park Service, who actually is the selecting official of the grants that we receive. Timelines. The notice of funding opportunity that we are building will be open for 5 years. The goal here is to make sure that the states and the communities have time to put together substantial proposals, but not have to put together proposals that may in fact sort of overreach or waste time. The idea here is that the states have a lot of work to do to make sure that they are listening to their communities and that the communities have access to make the proposals. We found that offering a notice of funding only once a year and then setting a deadline within the course of the same year made it very difficult for communities and the states to coordinate the best proposals. So what we've done here is added a rolling notice. So we will be accepting applications throughout the year, and then we will gather them at 2 points during the year, on June 1st and November 1st. And on June 1st, we will evaluate all of the proposals that we've received. We will go through the merit review process, and then we hope within 3 months, we will have a decision about which projects we will move forward to suggest for funding and build complete applications. We'll do the same thing on November 1st, and we will do that every year for the next 5 years. Announcements will be made to the best of our ability within 3 months. We were able to do that most recently with our round 7, and I think it's a reasonable thing to believe that we'll be able to receive, locate, check the applications, run them through the merit review, and then get a decision out through our leadership within 3 months. So that puts us at more or less announcements at September 1st and then February 1st. Once we make those announcements, the community and the state will have up to a year to build a full proposal that is fundable. And that's when things like the match requirement or the non-federal share requirement, all the compliance documents, the final construction drawings, and those sorts of commitments need to be made visible to the Park Service so we can make the funding award. So you have a year to put that together from the day that we make the funding announcement. We do have to acknowledge that priorities in the government change, And while the notice and the structure for receiving applications and evaluating them and notifying the applicants of their success or failures, that we believe should be able to stay in place. Sometimes the criteria or the priorities within those criteria may change, and we will be able to amend this structure. Our goal, again, is to maintain as much consistency with the timelines so that communities and states can take the time needed to gather the community engagement and the responses from the communities to develop full projects that are actionable and make sure that they're really responsive. And also that the states and the communities can take the time to make sure that the non-federal share and the other commitments required to make the project successful are in place before we make a full award. So let's go back to the last slide, the first slide. Again, what you're going to do is apply once the notice opens. We will grab your materials and make sure that they're complete, and then we will go through a merit review process based on the 5 criteria that we're looking at, and your budget information and the other things that you supply, some drawings, conceptual maps. We will then make an award announcement 3 months after we've run the merit review process. And from there, successful applicants will be supported to make an award package, put an award package together that includes compliance documents, full budgets, full construction drawings, those sorts of things, prior to actually making a full award. And then we'll make the award to the state, and then they will offer the state will offer the funds to the subrecipient, the municipality or the NGO or the available subrecipient. So that's the process for the grant, and that's the process for application and how we would review it. And those are the things that I know about this program. There is an ORLP inquiries inbox, and I give you this email so that you can send inquiries to it. I will tell you, and not to frustrate you, that many of the questions that you may have right now, and we'll try to go through some of them, will be very basic, and they are really questions that are best answered by your states. And we are going to do everything we can to get you a list of the state representatives' offices so you know who to start to go to for the states if you're interested in submitting an ORLP program. So our application. So I really encourage you that before you kind of start writing emails to our inbox and to our team, that you please consult the state and see if they can help you answer some of these questions before you even get to asking us questions. So that's just the very important piece. Trying to think what else I wanted to say. I felt like there was one last little item that I wanted to kick out, and it totally flew out of my head, so that's fine. But as I said, we've offered support for more than 200 parks at this juncture. 23 of them are complete. And we have many more that are in process and many more to build. The projects that we build are transformative for the communities that we support. And it's an exciting time to see more and more interest in this program, because it really has the ability to sort of meet a lot of the objectives that our partners like NRPA and City Parks Alliance support: healthier communities in places where a lot of people live. And often in places that don't have access to the best recreation that the United States can provide. And so we're really here to support you guys to help build your dreams and make better lives a reality for the communities that we support. So thanks. And I'm going to hand it over to Heather, I think.
Thanks, David. Oops. And I'm going to share screen. Okay, hopefully you're seeing my slides. I also am very excited to be here today. As Julie mentioned, my name is Heather Ramsey-Ondon, and I have worked on both sides of the grant table. I was an LWCF program officer for the National Park Service for nearly 16 years, and that was sandwiched between 7 years at the local urban natural resources parks and recreation level, first with Broward County in Florida, and now King County in Washington. I want to start with a little bit of context about King County and the history of urban unincorporated areas in case you're wondering how we qualify for ORLAP. King County is located on the eastern half of the western third of the state of Washington. At more than 2,000 square miles, we're twice as big as the state of Rhode Island, but constrained by lots of water and the mountain range that includes 5 major volcanoes. It's true that much of King County is rural and wild, but King County is also home to 2.3 million people, making us the 12th most populous county in the US. And where our cities are concentrated along the I-5 corridor, you'll find islands of unincorporated urban areas, completely surrounded by cities, but not part of any of them. We are the local park provider for these communities, which are among the densest urban areas in the state after the city of Seattle. Their status as unincorporated is the result not of population, density, or zoning, but rather less desirable historic building conditions coupled with redlining and explicitly racist property covenants that emerged in our region in the 1920s and continued until 1969. That was followed by decades of underinvestment and brings us to today, playing catch up to create a quality, equitably distributed parks and open space system. Oops. As an applicant, King County has been fortunate to receive Formula LWCF, ORLAP, and UPAR grants to support our system. A couple of examples, our recently completed Skyway Park revitalization project was one of the first ORLAP projects funded in the country. Originally created from undevelopable parcels, the park has a very challenging combination of shape, topography, and wetlands. Following decades of neglect, it had gone from community asset to shortcoming. Community-led efforts by the Skyway Coalition helped King County leverage support from voter-approved levy funding and donations by Seattle Kraken's One Roof Foundation to match an ORLAP grant and transform the park. New playground, pathways, parking, lighting, sports courts, shelter, and natural area restoration have transformed Skyway Park back into the resource the community needs and deserves. Our in-construction ORLAP project at Lakeland North is creating a brand new park in a park desert through a combination acquisition and development project. In this case, we were able to secure acquisition funding as match against an ORLAP grant for development. From our heat mapping work, we knew protecting trees in this location would be very important going forward. Because the site is adjacent to an elementary and middle school, we also wanted to create a nature-based recreation experience to complement the more athletic-focused facilities available at the nearby schools. This project will feature trails, a nature playground, community gathering spaces, and basic park infrastructure to help the community gather in the forest and connect. Today, I'm going to share 5 tips based on what I've seen go right and wrong from an applicant perspective. And if I miss your favorite, I hope you'll share that with us during the Q&A portion of the session. Tip number 1, system-wide pre-project planning and authentic community engagement. Before you apply for grants or even scope a project, you can position yourself for success by investing in the research and planning that will help you communicate need for your projects. This includes things like an equity framework, park and open space gap analysis, community needs assessment, and environmental justice analysis, along with building solid community relationships. Having great community involvement makes for better project design and also can help with letters of support, volunteers, and donations when you need them. Tip number 2, internal systems and support. Competing successfully for these grants is among the first step of a project, not the last. To get one of these grants all the way across the finish line, you'll need support from finance teams, reporting and billing cadences, capital and contract management, permitting, planning, scientists, and cultural resource experts, and/or access to budget for good consultants. You'll also need time coding and tracking systems, a reimbursable funding pool that you can tap for up to 4 years in advance of a project, leadership buy-in, and staff capacity for grant management as well as construction management. Tip number 3, match. You'll want to start building your match early. You can begin pooling eligible match 3 years before your grant award. If you have systems in place to code time, you can be ready to include in your match pool staff time for eligible pre-agreement work. Sources of match like volunteer hours and non-governmental funding can have a disproportionately positive impact on your scoring as compared with the size of donation. Anything helps. And in addition to volunteer hours, foundation grants, and corporate sponsors, eligible private donations can also take the form of land value and materials. Tip number 4, time horizons. Getting this part right might be the trickiest part of your planning work. This is an average time horizon and it includes the applicant parts of the project. So it's longer than what you'll hear from NPS or your state partner. There are things you can do to help compress this schedule and potential pitfalls to watch out for that can make things take longer. Before you're ready to submit a project for a grant, you should aim to meet certain planning and permitting milestones. Which milestones will depend on your project, your state, and your regulatory context. The farther along you are in this process before you submit a project, the more successful and faster you'll be getting through the rest of the phases. If you can afford to, it's especially helpful to get started on preliminary environmental site investigations and come to the grant application with at least 30% design. The state and NPS portion of the grant application process happens during the second balloon. While the duration will depend a bit on the specifics of your project and your state, planning for it to take 18 to 24 months from the time you submit your grant until you get the notice to proceed from your state ensures that your match isn't at risk for expiration, you aren't bidding on contracts too early, you can time your permits appropriately, your appraisals don't expire, and you can manage public expectations. If your project includes any combination of land acquisition and development, you'll need a landowner willing to hold the property for as many as 3 years or entering into a buy and hold with a land trust if you can find one able to work in an urban environment and if you can cover the additional hold costs. You may also be able to make the timing work with a waiver of retroactivity, which is paperwork you can file in advance of an acquisition to preserve it as match for a specific window of time. Since you won't know exactly when you'll receive the notice to proceed, but you'll need to start construction within 1 year of receiving your grant award, it's helpful if you can either utilize the contract with flexible timing or complete the earliest phases of your project in-house. Tip number 5, scoping needs. Focus on the needs of your community now, or rather 5 years from now. Don't get caught up in what's been successful in the past. You should be telling a personalized story about your specific community and how this project addresses their needs. Allure. Pick the sexy project. If you're in a position where you're shopping multiple projects for your jurisdiction, choose the one with the best story, the one that best matches the grant program's purpose. And if you're an agency scraping to fund one project, tell that story really well. Scale. Be holistic when you scope your project, but not too expansive. Aim to include every eligible expense directly related to your project in the scope of the grant. On the flip side, don't include too much in the scope by being overly optimistic about what you can reasonably accomplish during the project. You don't want to confuse the grant panel, raise red flags, or appear to be trying to bamboozle anyone. Everything in your scope must be an eligible cost. So if your project is a component of a larger vision, it's okay to share that for context, but very clearly separate it out from your grant submission. Budget. Don't undersell your project. In some grant programs, it's helpful to ask for the least amount of funding you think you can get by with, even if it means fundraising more later on. This is not that kind of program. You want your estimated costs to be as realistic and comprehensive as possible. And you want a budget for years 4, 5, and 6 when you're constructing the project, not for years 0 and 1 when you're scoping the project. Account for predicted inflation. You should also bring your concept designs to local permitting and engineering to check for surprise costs like unexpected utility hookup expenses and road frontage upgrade requirements. And the one bonus tip to rule them all, you heard this from both David and Missy, work closely with your state. Take advantage of the resources they offer. Many have excellent planning toolkits, checklists, webinars, and mapping resources for you. If your state is not as well resourced, you can still use materials from other states as reference, knowing that some of the specifics will be different. And yes, as you heard, there are perpetual responsibilities that come with this funding. You want to be certain the project you're submitting is worth the commitment. But I sometimes hear prospective applicants shy away from these funds because they don't want local decision making to be constrained in the future. Instead, I encourage you to consider the LWCF regulation as a powerful tool to protect local parks. Combined with community advocacy, LWCF can even the playing field when confronted with potential impacts from other civic priorities in the future. because I went through a lot really quickly, I wanted to leave you with some links and resources that might be helpful. That'll be in the slide deck that gets shared after this program, along with many thanks for including me today and to all the people who shared their wisdom with me for these slide ideas. And that sends you back to Julie.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Heather, David, and Missy, for that informative presentation. It's really exciting to see the National Park Service's application and eligibility changes and faster award time. And I loved Heather's 5 tips for developing a successful park project and recommendations. So again, thank you. We're now going to start the question and answer period. We have a lot of time, so hoping we can actually maybe get through all of the questions. I know that David has been going through and answering many of them, so I'm going to look for questions that have not been answered and try to combine some. Oh, yes, David, you're on mute.
I did remember what I was going to say when I finished.
Oh, great.
In the past, our merit reviewers have been most befuddled because they have not been able to see the community engagement in the application. And that has been one of the things that we're going to try and work on. And I think it's a 3-way issue. And so one is that I think maybe people doing the community engagement didn't document well, or the documentation was passed from the community to the state in the application, and the state didn't necessarily move it forward. We're going to work on that checkpoint. We can do that. But I just want to go back to that the community engagement piece and being able to see it in the merit review is really important for our reviewers. And it's one of the places where projects have been kicked out in the past. And the other piece I wanted to say is that if you do not make it through, let's say you feel like you've got it all together and you're ready to go for June 1, great, fine, put it in. If you don't make it through at June 1, you can still, we will give you comments back, and then you can reapply for the November or the following June. Just because you're denied doesn't mean you cannot return, and we will track, and we are, as part of our merit review requirements, we have to be able to offer you the rationale as to why you did not make it to the acceptance pool. So we are prepared to do that, and we will tell you, actually, this isn't the right project, go somewhere else, or yes, we can work with you, but we would like to see X or Y better. Thanks, Julie.
Which I love that, because I know that that's been very frustrating to those who have taken the time to fill out the application and do the behind the scenes work and then not get selected and not know why they weren't selected. And so that's great, David. As far as the community engagement component, City Parks Alliance has actually done workshops on community engagement, and we have a number of tools that folks could use to help them in this area. So we'll be sharing those tools. So just quickly going through, we do have about 35 minutes, so that's great. Can we submit more than one project per cycle? I think David and Missy, you could probably just keep your mute.
Yeah,
Yes.
of course. And I mean, and again, it's like the state is putting a block of projects through the box. So yes.
Great. Folks are wondering about states that don't participate.
Yeah. I don't know, Julie, what do you do about states that don't participate?
I don't know. I know that Florida was one, but they do now. So I think it was the states that just don't have the higher populations.
Well, there's that, and I think there's also capacity. I mean, we've seen, I'm new to LWCF. I have 13 years in the Park Service. I started working in February. I mean, Missy, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but what I see are 50 states and territories, several territories in the Commonwealth that have varying capacities to deal with a grant program like this. In their Parks and Rec programs. And that's an issue, because not every state is equal in the way that they measure and work with their public lands and can access a program like LWCF. And so it does have to do with the capacity at the state. And I guess what I would be saying is that if you're having a conversation with the state and you have a good ORLP project and you're trying to figure out how to get it through the door, I would be trying to have a conversation with my state liaison officer for LWCF. And I don't know what else to do. I mean, call us and maybe we also can have a conversation too, to find out and understand what the barriers are. This
Mhm.
program, not the stateside program as a whole, is now offering support to states through administrative grants and other means that are trying to build capacity to make sure that every state has a level playing field for LWCF participation, particularly now that we have, supported funding from Congress for forever through the Great American Outdoors Act. Missy?
Yeah, thanks, David. I don't really have much to add to that. I mean, everything you said is absolutely true. We've struggled with capacity in our states for this program, and on both sides, really, within NPS. But that's changing with the administrative grant, and now also with your team. And you've done so much for the program, and the whole entire development of a competitive grants program team. I mean, that just adds so much capacity to the process. Within NPS. And I would say, states should always feel welcome to contact us if they feel that there are barriers still to them participating in this program, or if they have questions about it. So hopefully we can help surmount whatever it is that states that aren't participating are struggling with.
Great. I'm going to try to combine a lot of different questions as far as how the grants can be used and what for. So can this grant be used for a pool, lagoon restoration, remediation, or the repair and replacement of public pools? And then also someone wanted about trails.
All of the above, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I want to say pools are fabulous and they're really interesting. So one of the problems, particularly with old pools, is they happen to be in old buildings. And some of the things that we see, so this program, I mean, the LWCF is 60 years old. And we have a lot of public pools that are older than that. And so we want to fall into this category of fixing those pools. And so they are historic properties. And so we've seen this as becomes a tension because it's a little bit more expensive and it may be more of an issue because you're actually trying to do something there. And that's one category of pool problem that we've seen. Pools are totally on deck, and we have a couple projects from from round 7 that are just pool projects, and we're happy to entertain pools, and that's fun. Yeah.
Great. And this goes back to, this is a possible change, just to make sure I understand, if a park has received ORLP and LWCF grants within the last 5 years, are they now able to apply for an ORLP grant at the same park?
Yes, they are.
I think that's a change.
That is a change. Correct.
Great.
I want to say that the reason that was put in place is that, look, each state gets an apportionment and it's based on their population, and it's not a lot. It's not enough to build a $15 million project. It really isn't. And so there was an idea, I think, that there could be a run on ORLP funds. And I don't think we've really seen that. We've seen some states are much more agile at applying for ORLP funds, but we haven't seen a run on them. And so I think we're happy to see phased approaches to projects. And as I said, like in the merit review, we will review what you're asking for. And if it's a project that's already received support from us or from the feds in other ways, we'll look at that. But I mean, we wouldn't want to say like, oh, this park is getting overused and it needs more X. So we're not going to say, no, we're not going to have. We want you to have the park and we want it to serve the people that it is using. And if ORLP is a piece of that solution, we certainly want to support that.
Great. David and Missy, in the past, only public agencies could apply for ORLP grants. And then if they partnered with a nonprofit, they would get a higher score. Folks are wondering whether can nonprofits now apply?
No, well, okay, so the states have to apply to us. Who the state allows to be a subrecipient has to be an eligible subrecipient, and the state will make that determination of the eligibility of that recipient.
So that could be a change, because it used to only be a public agency could apply for an ORLP grant.
So the issue comes down to the boundary, right, Missy? That this is a boundary issue. So go ahead, do that.
Yeah, it's my understanding. So it is a public agency are the only eligible recipients. That's still the case in the manual. We do have situations where nonprofit organizations have partnered with the public agencies to be able to provide assistance, in the maintenance and operations and programming within that park. And so they are actually co-sponsors in a grant. And again, yeah, it is a technical question that we would, if we get it from the state and there's and a case can be made, then we will fund that grant.
I will just say that, there is activity afoot on the House and Senate floor in Congress to change some of the rules about who can receive. And that may be forthcoming. It really does depend on what they decide to do.
Great. Heather, I'm going to throw one to you. Did you say construction needs to begin within 1 year of the award? And also, can you clarify the timing on how much of the project needs to be designed by the time of the initial application to our state? Or do we need 30% design completed after we get an award notice and apply for final funding?
Yeah, those are good questions. And some of that sounds like it might be a little bit different in this grant round. So I defer to to NPS and to your state also. The farther you are in design process, even if it's not a requirement, the easier it is to communicate the vision of your project to the review panel. So even if your state doesn't require it specifically, it can be helpful just to help make your project more competitive. But conceptual designs, I think, are still allowed, but I defer to NPS. The other thing that being farther along can help with is helping you to scope costs related to environmental review, cultural resources review, and permitting. If you're earlier in your project, you may underscope your budget.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to the population requirement because this comes up a lot with counties. If obviously the population requirement is 25 this round, which is great. This person works for the city of Westminster in Carroll County. Our population within the city limits is just under 20,000, but the population of Carroll County obviously exceeds the 25 requirement. Would this disqualify the city from applying, even though our parks serve all of Carroll County? David, can you handle it?
I love these things.
That's a tricky one, right?
Yes,
I would say yes.
No, I don't know. I can't. I guess I want to see it on paper, but the other one is it actually doesn't matter what I say. We have to have a conversation with your state liaison officer, and that's critical. Like if you're coming to them saying, "Hey, I've got this. This is the project we want to do. This is the population it's serving." We got to figure out which box it fits in, and we need to talk to them to make sure that they're on board with that.
Right.
So I mean that's one of the things where please use the ORLP inquiries inbox, and we can have that conversation with the state, the three of us, and figure out what that needs to look like.
Right. Can you provide an example of statement of need? What is recommended to be included in that?
Yeah, let me tell you what I got. In the NOFO, we kind of write this out.
Okay, that's great.
And so they'll be written out, but let me just tell you what I kind of have. They're long. Sorry, I'm in the wrong document. Keep going, and let me.
Yeah, okay.
Let me come back.
Does an applicant need to prepare an environmental impact statement under NEPA, or what NEPA compliance is required? And then, he's saying, obviously for a small project, this could be costly and timely, time consumptive, especially in California where CEQA is applicable.
Mm-hmm. So I'll go ahead and answer if that's all right, Julie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about environmental compliance until the cows come home. I mean, there's so many different types of projects. What we don't want you to do is overthink it. There is a good checklist in the A&R form, which we can share as a separate attachment. And it just kind of asks you certain questions. about the different types of resources that could possibly be impacted by what the action by your project and the things that you're proposing in your project. So, you know, if you don't have if you have a project that is not very, I mean, this is just speaking totally without seeing any project details, obviously, but many of our LWCF projects do fall within the category of categorical exclusion. I don't know that we've ever had an environmental impact statement. We would not bump up to that NEPA pathway unless there was something, you know, very big. I can't even give an example because I don't think we've had any. We mostly live in the world of categorical exclusions and environmental assessments. And this is a question, again, for your state. However, our states typically will relay these questions up to the National Park Service, and our compliance officers have a lot of experience looking at different types of projects and evaluating what types of projects will need the specific NEPA pathway, for example, like I said, categorical exclusion or EA. So ask the question before you embark on doing any kind of NEPA document, especially if you're going to be spending a lot of money. It is very expensive to do an environmental assessment and environmental impact statement. We don't want you going down that path until you know, if you don't need to. The other thing with states like California that have a state level environmental quality review, there can be a lot of work done for that state program that could be combined and also adopted, or that we could use in our evaluation for the type of NEPA pathway. So the goal is to not make you do the work, just to make sure you're not doing 2 times the work. So just make sure you're coordinating with the state is coordinating with us, you know, on these environmental questions.
And Missy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the investigations and documentation needed for the grant process are eligible as grant expenses, correct?
Yes, and thank you for saying, Heather. Yeah, that's absolutely right. All of the work that you do for compliance and, you know, any kind of upfront research, historic, environmental, are eligible expenses. Correct. So you get reimbursed for that. Although it is still an expensive we know it's a hardship up front. However, just know too that you do get the money back if you have to embark on, you know, expensive permitting.
And again, I think a piece of this is that this program was set up because people weren't building parks in cities, period. I mean, that was one of the big pieces, and that those are difficult and complicated compliance situations in which to remediate problems that require something in order for public use to take place. And so that was something that was a phenomenon that people were understanding, and that's why ORLP was established. The reason we're asking folks to go through the state is because the state largely is aware that if you want to build a project in the middle of wherever, particularly in an urban area, it is possible that that is going to be a very lengthy and expensive and complicated situation. And so we're asking you to check with them to make sure that that is actually a viable thing, because we don't want to design a beautiful thing and get people's hopes up that we're going to do something here finally on this brownfield and no one's there to back it. And it is also why the limits on funding for this project are kind of through the roof. I mean, this you can have up to $50 million on a proposal here, and that's a $30 million project. It's a major infrastructure project going into the heart of a very large population center, probably on some pretty messed up land. And so that's what this program is designed to do. So, I guess, we haven't done any EIS, we haven't been in that box before, but the state will have to work with the recipient, subrecipient to think about remediation if that is a piece of what's going on. And we can't pay for remediation, but we can pay for the things that go around it. And we can pay for often the compliance pieces around it in kind. We can do that work, but we can't actually, buy clean soil and do that stuff. That's not what this is for. So you're probably looking at doing something in conjunction with another agency, largely federal, or if you're, in the state of California where you have some extra cash kicking around to do this work. I mean, that's a thing, but but it is, we are here, that is what this program was sort of designed to do, is work in these tough spaces. And so we are ready to listen to those questions and problems. We are here to help those problems.
Yes, Ceci.
I just wanted to call out one question, which I think is a good one, and you might have mentioned it. I feel like you did talk about this a little bit, David, in your presentation. The question is there a checklist that can be used to evaluate a project for its eligibility and applicability to this program prior to spending the time and effort of making an application? So the first part of that is to you. I know that Heather mentioned, and I've seen some states actually do have, pretty extensive information about the ORLP program or about the LWCF program, and they provide checklists for applicants prior to submitting. So I did hear talk of us, kind of trying to address that as well in the National Park Service, David, but I don't know if you wanted to go there, or do we have a checklist? Oops, you're on mute.
We're not hearing you, David.
Got to drag
There you
my
go.
mouse down to the bottom of the screen. It's really technical. No, we don't have a checklist. And we probably should have one. I just got a staff, so that's good. So we can work on that, and they're on this call, so they're listening.
Yeah. And maybe the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, will have the particulars, right? Correct?
For which? For what's required? What documentation is required?
No, for determining if your project is eligible.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, is the project eligible before we go down the road of spending all this money? Yeah, I think that was what the intent of, or basically the spirit of that question was.
I'll just say that past rounds have said we want everything up front. And what we have seen is that everything up front has then changed between the time everything up front has come in, and then we get to actual award. What we are now asking is a little more detail, like written with some description and some budget, and then working with the state to make sure it is eligible and actionable so that they submit a project that we can really evaluate for its merit. Then we get into the space of, here are all the documents that are required. This is the compliance that's required, and it should have been measured and brought up in the budget that was proposed, because the state should be supporting to figure out, making sure that you're asking for the right kinds of things. And we're involved in that. We can be involved in that process too. It's just not, we can't advise on every project. I can't say your project is eligible, your project is ineligible, and then you go to the state and the state says yes or no, and they figure it out. It's like they have to submit it. So I don't want to get into a space where the Park Service is up against the state, who is the gatekeeper for the application. Like, we don't want to be in that world. We can advise you on what we think is good, and if the state disagrees with us, I'm happy to have a conversation, but it is the state's call.
Great. And I see that Heather put in a checklist
Heather.
for Washington. So in the chat. So thank you, Heather. As we know, the matching grant is always a challenge. Can you go through and explain the various ways the matching grant can be? Like, I know that it doesn't have to be just dollars. And then I know that other federal programs usually can't match, but can CDBG still be used?
Yeah, so federal money is federal money, and it's designed by Congress. It's not designed by us. Those are our eligibility requirements. That's not me. That's not the Park Service. So there are certain times at which Congress has said certain federal funds are eligible for match. They have to say that. It's not our decision or call. So CDBG is one. Community Development Block Grants is one. There are ARPA funds that are out there that are called state and local something or others. And those guys are also eligible. Most of them, I think, are expiring shortly, so they need to be obligated soon. So that may not be an issue going forward. There are transportation funds. I can't remember, Missy, which category for transportation fund is eligible, but there's something. I can't remember which one it is. Brandon
Yeah,
Pace.
I'm blanking. Wait, I'll look it up.
Brandon Pace is out there. He's going to shout out in a second. But so that's so there are some categories, and most of your states should know. And if they don't, then we can check. And we even have questions internally when someone says, "Is this federal fund available?" Because someone said it was, and sometimes there are things we don't know. So that's possible. Matching funds, volunteer hours, track them. Community engagement time, track it. The university students doing the to help you get the thing going, those guys, track it. So you could do
Donated land. Right?
Donated land, we do that, and that's match. So that's all in that matching space. And we can work very creatively with you to understand and determine that. Again, fiscally, the state is responsible for holding the money, and so the match does. There are procurement rules that may apply in a particular state that I can't speak to, that may also have some leverage on that I can't see, and it does depend on where the funds are coming from and how they're being used. But there are so there's some federal funds, there's volunteer, there's donation. All of those things are matchable.
What about Congressional Regional Planning Commission funds?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. I also don't know about like congressional discretionary funding. That might also be possible. Like sometimes Congress people have a discretionary fund and that they can use for certain pet projects. I don't know whether that matches to ORLP or not. I've never looked at it. It's a good question.
Right. Scrolling back up, there were a couple questions, and I think this might also be a change on signage. You sort of said that I don't think signage was allowable as far as getting funds for that in the past. Is that new this year?
I don't know that it was ever said you can't do art. I don't know it was ever. I think it had been someone had.
I think just as far as funding that particular piece of it.
We don't. There's nothing in LWCF Act that says we wouldn't be able to do that here.
Great, good. There's a lot of Buy America requirements. Is that
they're active, and we are responsible to them, and we have a process for accepting and asking for waivers, which we will do, and we'll do that prior to the assigning of any award. We have a process right now where if you have Buy America Act waiver requests, we send them through our financial assistance people. It takes 2 to 3 weeks for them to look at them.
Great. There's a lot. Everyone keeps asking about how they can find their state agency contact. And again, City Parks Alliance will be sending out, we have a whole updated contact list, just came in yesterday. So we will be sending that out to all the registrants on this webinar.
So, and let me just add that every state is different. And I don't know if I think I've said this a couple of times, every state's different. And so what's really important is that like you're going to get a list and you're going to look at these people and you're going to start calling the state liaison offices. Some of them are going to be like, why are you calling me? And you're going to say, because I'm trying to figure out who it is I need to talk to about a potential ORLP application. And sometimes those people will know exactly what you're talking about and will direct you there. And sometimes they'll be like, I don't know what this is. Can someone help me? Because there are different levels at each state. So just be patient as you're working through that process. And really, if you get to a point where like, I'm totally stuck, ORLP_inquiries at nps.gov, and we will go and help you. But try working through the state first to see if we can get some concurrence there. We were just at the National Association of State Liaison Officers 3 weeks ago, Julie, Missy, and I, and we rolled out more or less the presentation you saw today and a description of what ORLP will look like in this 5-year notice period. And they all are expecting questions from the field. They are expecting you.
As an applicant, I find sometimes it's helpful instead of going straight to the state liaison officer, who's usually quite high level, governor appointed, look at the agency that they are part of and just Google that agency and LWCF or your browser of choice. Doesn't have to be Google, could be Edge or whoever. And then it'll often pop up with like who the staff contact is and the program page with resources.
Good call. I mean, yeah, excellent call, Heather. It's just that's, you know, it's as I said, like they're different tiers, and so sometimes you're calling someone in the governor's office, which may make no sense whatsoever for what you're asking. So look at the agency that that person oversees and is attached to, and look through there to the directory to find an LWCF person. Every state has one. Every territory has.
And don't get frustrated if they don't know the answer, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of turnover, and we had a show of hands of how many new people at this conference we were just at, and there's a lot of new people just this last year. So they'll probably then have to go to Missy or David to ask, and then they'll have to wait for that answer. And so they're just
And
maybe
I'm new. You know, I'm new.
David's new.
And I'll say that many of my staff that I work with, our team, are not new. And so I may just send you to them because I don't have answers. They do. We do
I'm
this
gonna go back.
collective.
I'm going to go back to who can apply. I know we already touched on that, and you should ask the state, but this does seem to be like a big change. People are saying, you know, it used to be just, you know, public agencies or park districts, or so again, can like foundations, nonprofits, park departments.
Again, Missy, help me here. But the key is that at the end of the day, what are we doing? We're giving money to somewhere to encumber land that will be held in conservation and in recreation in perpetuity. The landholder, the title holder of that land, must be able to guarantee that on some level with surety with the state. And the state has to recognize them as that partner.
Got it. That's great.
And so, you know, you can be whoever you want to be, but if you're not talking to the municipality or the county or the state, and they're saying, yes, you, because you are, I don't know, the largest land conservancy in Ohio or whatever. I don't know what that is, but you need to make sure that you have the ability to maintain and hold that guarantee.
Great.
If that's what the act demands. That's correct, right?
Do you know if states limit the number of applications for formula or ORLP? Up to the state, probably.
Idiosyncratic. Yep.
Great. And some another change about the NOFO for 5 years, which is great. But folks are wondering, will there be changes? I think the idea is that there won't be major changes, which is why we're doing this NOFO for 5 years. But there might be minor, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, and so what's interesting is that the financial assistance people that we work with are very happy to make an amendment like you do to anything. And so we will likely have to do that to meet whatever needs an administration has or the world has. I don't know what they will be. But it makes more sense to set up the timing structure and the basic requirements, set that up in a structure that the states can step to, that the communities can work with the state and develop those relationships to get the community engagement over time. It makes more sense to have that in place. And yeah, I mean, can you expect changes? Probably. Will we try to get them out as soon as possible, an amendment? Absolutely. Because that's going to come down on our heads where they're going to say, now you are going to make sure that all ORLP grants include X. And in order to do that, we will have to immediately report out to the field to make sure that that's amended on grants.gov, and it will be listed. It will say, here is the NOFO for ORLP standing 5 years, and then it will say, please see amendment. It will be underneath, and the amendment will be there, and it will say flashing.
Great.
Amendment.
David and Missy, in the past, there have been administration priorities. I'm remembering one early on was workforce development. In one of the rounds, anti-displacement strategies. Do you know what, I know the NOFO is not out. Do you know if there will be a priority in this next NOFO?
No, I think what I just gave you for the core criteria will stand. And if there is going to be one, we'll see it sometime, probably after January 20th, when the new administration comes in, they may add something to it. That's possible. Will it affect June 1? I would, myself, I would make the recommendation that we have it kick in after June 1, because people by the time we get to January, we may have already been working on this for some time. So I can only make the recommendations as I don't know, where are we? We're the subject matter experts of the program, but we will only do what we can do. I can't push that.
Okay. What if a park is located in a tract that is identified as non-disadvantaged, but the adjacent tracts are identified as disadvantaged? Does this park qualify? I think that goes into them making the statement, which you're expanding that. You don't have to just look at the Justice 40 tool.
Yes. So it's not, I mean, so what was happening is that the round 7 said it has to be in a Justice 40 GIS block. All right. Well, that doesn't really help because, first of all, there's no buffer around it, and we don't use geography and we don't use maps that way. So we shouldn't use data like that. So we're not doing that. And then the other question is that not all things that are in the CGIS tool correspond necessarily to places that may be at risk. And so we added the environmental justice screening tool. And then lastly, territories don't have the demographic data that CEQ uses to build that tool. Same thing with EPA. And so they actually have to write a text anyway. And so what we've been saying is, write the text, just give us just write something, give us something that says, look, there's no park for a mile for this neighborhood. This neighborhood is 75% unemployed. It is 25,000 people living within a half-mile walk of this place. We think we need a park here. Here's the land. It's held by X. We think it qualifies. We would like to develop here. And that's what we want to see people do. We want to hear a connection between the land and the community and write that out for us. And we will accept that if the tool doesn't work for you, because it doesn't work for everyone.
Great. One last, it is 2:27. I'm going to need to wrap up, but folks are asking for examples of awardees. And I'm just going to say again, that you can find all 7 rounds of awardees on City Parks Alliance's website under the funding tab, and that will give you an idea of what projects were awarded. So I was completely wrong in thinking I could make it through all those questions. Again, if you have further questions, you should be contacting your state, or Missy and David had the inquiries email that you could use. So I just have to, in the interest of time, I'm going to have to close up this webinar. I did want to say again that the links to today's recording, the presentation with contact info, a LWCF state officer contact list that we keep talking about, and related resources will be emailed to all registrants. And again, if you're not looking, if your project doesn't seem right for an ORLP grant, then please consider the LWCF state formula grant program as an option. We do just have a survey. We're asking that you please fill out our survey. We'd like to know if our webinars are helpful. And then just a heads up, City Parks Alliance will be hosting 2 webinars in December, one on December 10th about stretching maintenance budgets. We all know that that is a tough one. And another one on December 17th about parks and green stormwater infrastructure. So you can find out more and register by visiting the webinar page under the events tab at cityparksalliance.org. If you're interested in becoming a member, please visit cityparksalliance.org/join for information about all of our great member benefits, including workshops, member-only webinars, and peer conversations, park study tours, and more. And again, if you're interested in continuing education credits for AICP, LACIS, or City Parks Alliance General CEU offering, look for, again, this follow-up email in the next few days with instructions on how to claim your credits. And I just lastly want to say a big thank you to David, Missy, and Heather for presenting today. We really hope that this webinar has been helpful to you. And last but not least, many thanks to all of you for joining us, and keep up the great work for all you're doing in our nation's urban parks.
Thanks,
So
Julie. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Missy. Thanks, everyone. That was fun.
Great job. Thanks, you guys. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.